So I would love to start, like we start everything, with a little attunement. And I noticed that you just did something yourself, which is a practice that you like to do before podcasts and things like that.
Yeah, my dear friend, business partner, Arthur Samuel Joseph, trained Tony Robbins, Sean Connery, Angelina Jolie, Arnold Schwarzenegger, to name a few people. And so he and I have been working together for 3 years, and he's been my vocal coach for 10 years.
Wow. So the warm-up that you do, it's designed to unlock your throat, or what's the...
So it's fascinating. We're actually in the middle of a 7-week class that we teach once a quarter. And we were just talking about this in yesterday's class, is that we don't realize it, but a lot of our emotional trauma hangs out in here. And this, how do you say it? Your mandible?
Temples.
The mandibles right here is where we have the most moving parts in our entire body. I think it's 56 little parts. So what we do is we want to stretch, because we don't even realize it at a subconscious level, Nick. But if I have tension, like I'm going to try and figure right now, if I'm like putting tension in my jaw or my tongue, you're not going to trust me. I'm not going to come across as authentic. So it's really critical to release tongue and jaw tension to create more resonance in our voice. For example, if I drop out of what we call the work that I do, I'll try to drop out of it. So I used to talk really fast like this, and there was no work in it. And you can see I'm just not really paying attention. I'm not in my deeper listening. I'm talking at you rather than to you. However, when I drop into my deeper listening, when I see the edge and arc of sound, then I'm able to be with you, be more present with you, and to shift the resonance of my voice. So that way I'm being myself, my capital S self, as we say.
And you feel like a lot of that tracks back to the physical makeup of the jaw and being in tune with those muscles.
It's in tune to our whole physiology. Another big aspect of what we teach is what's called a conscious, loving breath. So if I tell you, Nick, to take a breath, you're going to go, right? Take a top of the morning breath. That's one thing. Now, I want you to allow a slow, soft, conscious, loving breath. And how did that feel?
Feels really good.
Yeah, and that was even a little fast. That was about 3 seconds, not 5. And in fact, just today I was playing a clip. One of the women who's in our current class was in a class with us back in February. And the results were amazing. Everybody in class said, can you see a clip of her 3 or 4 months ago? And I pulled this clip out. And the woman who was there 3 or 4 months ago is a different woman than the woman who's showing up today to class.
So we have the physiology of our face. We have the conscious breath. What are some other practical applications I know you bring into your life to find that resonance with your higher self?
Prayer and meditation, as you and I have talked about many times. And that's the thing I love so much about my dear friend Arthur, is he and I both have not missed a day of prayer or meditation. For me, for 10 years, for him, for 6 decades. And that's why I personally it's like breathing to me. It's like you wouldn't not breathe, just like I wouldn't not pray. I wouldn't not meditate, journal, do inner child work. It's almost a spiritual soup, is what I like to call it. And so I have about 40 different things that I choose from. It's like if you had your favorite seasonings, you might have some curcumin, you might have some cinnamon, you might have some turmeric. And so that's the way I look at spiritual soup, is that every day I'm making a more joy-filled, tastier soup that fills my soul. And that's what I do, is I just add a pinch of meditation, a smattering of conscious loving breath work, and then voila, you get a tasty, delicious life.
And if spirituality is a soup to you, what do you feel like is the thickest broth?
Love. Love. I was just talking to Deepak and Don about this. As you know, I'm very grateful I've gotten to do, I think we did our 18th episode this last week, and it hasn't yet aired. It's coming out shortly. And I was meditating before, and I have to be honest, Nick, I am not a quantum physicist. I am not a neuroscientist, and yet I get to work with some renowned thought leaders who are. And I don't know about you. Have you ever felt inept? Like for me, I was like, I am not smart enough to do this. So about 3 years ago, when Deepak and Don and I first started working together, I was supposed to do an interview with them on special relativity. I studied Stephen Hawking's for weeks. I devoured Deepak's books, Don's books, Stephen Hawking's books. The date came for the interview, and Nick, I was like, I can't. I literally got on my hands and knees and prayed. I was like, God, I can't. I'm not qualified to do this interview tonight. And without missing a beat, God said, ask Einstein. And I was like, what? And God's like, yes, 1 hour before your interview with Deepak and Don, go into a meditative state. When you're in that state, ask Einstein. He'll tell you everything you need. And I was like, I'm pretty spiritual, but I was a little skeptical of that. So fast forward that night, 10 o'clock interview PM here in Portugal. And so it's 9 o'clock. And I go into my normal meditation. I say some mantras. And then about 8 minutes in, I'm like, Einstein, Mr. Albert Einstein, this is Jennifer Cahill down here on Earth. God said you could help me out. And it was the strangest sensation, Nick. I'm sitting there and I started reverse swirling and I dropped out of space and time. And Einstein is explaining everything, showing, I don't know how long I was gone. I came back in time for the interview. Up until this last interview, it was one of the most powerful ones we did. Though to take it back to your question of what is the thickest broth. So here I was getting ready to do another interview with Deepak and Don on a very complicated paper Don wrote on conscious agents and how space-time is no longer fundamental, which is what physics tells us and quantum physics tells us. So then the question is, what is fundamental? And Don's purporting it's consciousness. So he gets into quarks and gluons and all this stuff. So again, I hadn't been told I got this time to ask Einstein, but I'm like, I could use a friend in this one. So I'm going to phone a friend. So before this interview, I asked Einstein, and Einstein tells me, he's like, Jennifer, in the paper, Don refers to the fact that protons are made up of gluons and quarks, but the gluons are really the thing that connect the quarks within the proton. And Einstein's like, that's love. What makes up the whole universe is gluons, which are love. So I didn't know if I was going to share this in the interview. You know, I was a little embarrassed and ashamed of like, do I even tell Deepak and Don that I've been talking to Einstein in a meditative state? And it just came up. And the last thing I said before we closed, I said, guys, we haven't talked about love. What if gluons are love and love is what binds the whole universe? And Don was like, you are absolutely right. And then Deepak started sharing about it. So I would say that love is the thickest soup broth.
Aho.
Aho.
And one thing I really appreciate and admire about you is how forthcoming you are in your spiritual practices. Even when you're sharing the story and how you dropped into that space and how you feel this deep resonance with these spirits. It's one thing I really look up to, because when we first went to dinner, it made me very comfortable coming forth as to some of my inspirations and some of the things that I do to drop into these spaces. How have you found navigating that space? You know, you even mentioned there feeling a little bit embarrassed to share that experience with your podcast guests.
For me, Nick, it really comes down to trust, just trust, implicit trust and certainty beyond logic. So there are those moments where we might have what we would call our third dimensional self. I didn't even know about this until I met my friend Kimberly Meredith, who wrote a book called Awakening to the Fifth Dimension. I don't know about you. I did not know there was this thing called the fifth dimension. Though the way she described it is that the fifth dimension is something that is where you have endless love, perfect certainty, creativity, happiness, joy. It's bliss. And so in the third dimension is where we have fear and shame and greed and all of these other things. And so I would say I'm by no means living, I think maybe the Dalai Lama and one or two other people in the world have reached that place where we never drop into fear or doubt or worry. And so it's a human experience to vacillate, I would say, back and forth between, am I in my full power right now, or am I doubting that all of my needs are met? And that's really what I think we're all striving towards spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally.
And how do you cultivate that trust in a daily practice? Because I know you lean into so many different things. You know, what is your method of cultivating that trust and reestablishing it when you lose it?
It's a great question. I'll tell you something funny. I think I'd share this with you. We had a little laugh about it. So for a while there, I was investing in cryptocurrency a couple of years ago. And I would ask God. I talk to God every day. So one of my teachers taught me to talk to God every single day. So I would talk out loud. I'd say, God, what is my assignment for today? What is my purpose? What would you like me to know? So on and so forth. And at the time I was asking God, do I invest in Bitcoin? Do I invest in Ether? Do I buy? Do I sell? And this worked for a long time. It was like amazing results. And then one day I stopped hearing God and kept buying Bitcoin. I stopped. So I say that because most of the time how I trust is I just talk to God. And it was a perfect example this morning. I didn't listen to God. Do not ask for God's wisdom and then ignore it. So I was talking to God the same way I do every day. What is my assignment today? Heal and trust. Now, what is my purpose? is it in my highest and best good? If I had heard no to doing the podcast with you today, I just would have said, Nick, I'm sorry, God said we can't do this today. I literally have canceled trips, canceled plans, canceled anything you can imagine if I don't get a yes to it when I talk to God. And then what I love is I'll write all of this down and I'll see what percentage of the time what I've heard is correct. Like phone calls will be canceled that I'd have no idea they'd be canceled, but God knew before I did. So this morning I was asking God, I was like, God, do I go to Liberty? It's one of my favorite coffee places here in Lisbon. And God said, no. But egotistical Jen, Yehuda and I, my husband and I, love to go to Liberty. And I was like really craving barley bowl with the Parmesan that I couldn't make at home. And so my husband said, honey, do you want to go to Liberty? I was like, yeah. You have to laugh. This is the way the universe works. Like the universe clearly reflects things back to you. So I kid you not, Nick, we walk down the hill. Have you been to our house? Like our house is at the top of the highest hill. And so it's a commitment to walk down and up that hill. So we get down to Liberty, we sit down, we see our favorite woman, Susie, who serves. Hi, Susie. We sit down. I'm like, oh, I'd love the barley bowl. And she's, oh, we don't have that today. The kitchen's broken. Like all my favorite dishes there were not available. And I'm like, oh, literally nothing I wanted was there. And that's why God had told me no, but I just had to go and experience it for myself.
And how do you find these messages through your intuition? Because I feel like there's this belief where, and I think I'm guilty of this more than anybody, of powering through, despite there being very clear signs or messages that maybe this isn't in resonance with our higher self. Like, how do you find the balance between that grit of being an entrepreneur and doing the things you're doing at this scale and really listening to the higher self?
I don't know about anybody else, Nick. I can only speak for myself, and I will tell you what I've learned Kabbalistically from a lot of my favorite spiritual teachers out there, is that most of us are given time in order to amend our behavior. Let's say we're a jerk to somebody or a jerk to ourselves or we're rude or whatever it might be. The universe doesn't give us an immediate thing. So let's say we ignore our intuition, right? We don't listen to it right away. Most of us might go 3 months, 6 months, a few years before we see the ramifications because the universe is giving us space and time to choose differently, to choose other options. However, according to the Kabbalist, as we do more spiritual work, as we elevate our soul higher and higher, if I am a jerk to anyone, Nick, or if I do something that goes against my intuition, I will stub my toe, cut my finger. The universe will literally physically block me within seconds or moments afterwards. Because I've been doing so much work, it's like I couldn't even go against my intuition if I wanted to, because God's just going to laugh at me. He's going to be like, oh, you want to go to Liberty? I got this. So it's just trusting and then putting that one step in front of the other. Like even when I sold my last company, most people would say you're selling to one of the largest accounting firms in the United States. And I told them there were certain days I refused to sign contracts. I told the people who were buying me, and I said, listen, spiritually speaking, there are certain days that are energetically more prosperous, abundant, and better for all of us and harmonious if we sign on those days. And these are the days I'm unwilling to sign. So I'm uncompromising on holding myself to account until the moments where I want immediate gratification, like this morning, and then the universe just meets me right where I'm at. It's, oh, you didn't want to listen? I was trying to save you the pain of going up and down the hill, and a hill is a metaphor, by the way, for life. We're not just talking about my hill. We're talking about your hill and your hill.
This is something that I've been exploring in my own practices. Like, what's the relationship between attunement and manifestation? And what are the things that we should be doing to attune ourselves every day? How much time should we dedicate to that? And if that attunement is out of resonance with the manifestation we were planning that day, do we trust the attunement or do we power through the manifestation? It seems like you got this attunement practice that comes first and is informative to the manifestation, where things are much more malleable over there, versus for a lot of other people, the attunement is the piece that is compromised, not the manifestation. Right? You flip the script, if you will.
I was just having a conversation with somebody about this the other day, and we're sitting on a terrace and discussing this idea of manifestation. One of the greatest secrets that I've ever learned, Nick, is to be 1000% committed and unattached. I think that's where in the manifestation side, people cause themselves pain. The moment you think, like you can desire something, you can desire a soulmate, you can desire a dream career, or being a podcast, whatever it is, though it's being able to surrender and completely release. I'll give you some examples of this. So yes, the attunement for me, you can't have one without the other. In fact, I was sharing this recently too. It's like the masculine and the feminine. You have the intention, which let's say is the attunement, which is that feminine energy. It's that space from something which you're going to create, right? And then you have the action, which is more the masculine, which is more the manifestation, etc. But if you're out of balance with either, if you have intention without action or feminine without masculine, you're not going to be able to manifest. If you have masculine, all action without that intention, that attunement, you're also not going to be able to manifest. So for me, I've always said it's the intention multiplied by the action that creates our ability to manifest in the world. And something I say every day as part of my morning practice that really allows me to surrender is I say, universe, please remove anything or anyone who is not meant to be in my life. This includes my husband, who I love with my whole heart and soul, as you know, and give me the wisdom to know it's happening for my good. And draw the right people and resources towards me. Nick, if we all said that out loud every day, miracles would rain down upon us faster than you could say lickety-split. Because I have taught this to job seekers. There was somebody I was coaching the other day who I taught this to. And it's funny because you think you want X. Like a great example of this, there was a woman I was mentoring in Los Angeles, and she had a job for 10 years. But you know how you have that one boss who's just a jerk, right? And it's like grating on you. And so that was the only reason she was leaving. There was this one person she didn't like in the company. The person wasn't going anywhere. So she went out searching for her dream job. Now, the funny thing was, I knew the law firm she was interviewing at, and I, of course, knew her. And I said, just do me a favor. She was in the third and final stages. She was going in. She was expecting to get an offer. I said, just say this. Please remove anything or anyone. If this job is meant to be mine, let it be mine. If not, lovingly remove it from my life and give me the wisdom to know it's happening for my good. So she goes in. And Nick, they had an offer written for her. I know this on the back end. So it was a formality. She was supposed to be given an offer that day. And something happened where all of a sudden they hated her. And she's, what happened? The client couldn't explain it. They're like, it was the weirdest thing. We had an offer drafted to hand to her, and then all of a sudden everyone hated her. It just wasn't meant to be. And then I said, just trust. This is very good. 1 week later, Nick, out of the blue, after she just trusted and surrendered, the woman who worked at her company, changed offices after 10 years of being there. So then she was able to stay at the job she loved and didn't even have to move, and it all worked out perfectly.
Yeah, bring this to the masculine or like the entrepreneurship route. I like giving people this framework where it's, if you were to go start a new company today, who would you bring with you? And immediately, who doesn't belong? If you were to just drop everything and move on, who would you choose to take with you? And I feel like this applies to many parts of our life. If I was to get up and move to New York, who would I want to come with me and be my neighbors? And it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly where people stand in your life. And bringing this to a spiritual practice, not like a business one or like a mind game one, but a literal request for removal and for that spiritual surgery to be applied daily is powerful.
It is unreal. If you want, I will tell you the other thing that I've only had. I'll tell you a story. And it's the other practice that if you want to blow open the gates of holy moly, have more light, more manifestation, more miracles than ever before. Can I share with you a story? So many years ago, a couple 100 years ago, there were these sages, and they were tasked with one thing, to travel the world and to draw the greatest wisdom from all the far corners of the world. And this was long before the days of cars and electricity and all of this. So they would just wander. And one day they wander upon this village in Eastern Europe. And as they're coming into the town, they noticed a little tavern over here. And they noticed some strange light coming out of the tavern. Again, it's before the days of electricity. And they go in and they see a man sitting by himself, just eating his afternoon stew. And yet there seems to be some kind of evanescence around him, right? And so the sages are curious and they say, excuse us, sir, beg your pardon. We just noticed that you seem to be glowing a little bit. There seems to be something a little bit unique about you. We're sages. It's our job to draw the wisdom of the world and bring it to the masses. Could you tell us, are you special? Is there something unique about you? And the man is very humble. He shakes his head, looks down into his stew and says, oh, thank you, kind sirs, but I think you're mistaken. I'm just a humble, normal man. I wish you well on your travels. And the sages are a little bit like downtrodden. They're like, we got it wrong maybe, but we don't normally get it wrong. So they're in the village another day and they're walking by again around lunch. And this time there's even more light coming off the guy. And they go up and they're like, sir, we bothered you yesterday during lunch, beg our pardon again, but forgive us. Did you think of anything between now and yesterday that maybe you do, the rest of us don't do? And he gave it a little thought and he said, gentlemen, I've been reflecting on your inquiry and I've been considering I try to be a good father and a good husband and a good friend, but alas, I'm not that important. Farewell, gentlemen. And it's the final day and they're walking out. As they're leaving the village, they have to pass this tavern again. And there's the man sitting by the window and just light is pulsing off this man. And they approach him and they say, sir, we are leaving. We'll probably never meet you again. We beg of you, was there anything by any chance that you did or that you do that we don't know about that maybe the rest of us don't do? The man said, I pray to God, but I think a lot of people do that. And I'm sorry, good luck in unveiling the mysteries of the world. So the men are they're like, okay, it wasn't meant for us. So they start to walk out. And the man raises his hand and they're back at his table, wrapped at the tent. And you see, gentlemen, there is one thing I do. Yes, there's one thing that I do that maybe not everyone else does. And say, yes, what is it? He said, every night before I go to bed, I say, God, if you know that tomorrow I will reveal the light that you intend me to reveal, please wake me. However, if you know that tomorrow I will wake up and I will not reveal the light you intend me to reveal, please don't wake me. And I will tell you, Nick, I heard that 4 years ago now, at a Rosh Hashanah celebration at the Kabbalah Center. And I've only had the courage to say that about 60 times. But I will tell you, every night I've said that prayer. And I wake up the next day, it's life-changing. Because you're looking for how to reveal light. Mm-hmm. It's a completely different context on how you see the world.
Mm-hmm. And that's an attachment.
It's a whole other level.
Yeah. And truly asking for even removal of ourselves out of this context if we can't step up to the plate, if we actually can't heed the call to bring through the light.
It's magical. And the last time I actually just had the courage to say it last week. And the days where I say that, it's just like light is streaming in from every corner because it's like we see the world with filters. Imagine if you put on a pair of glasses and you put on blame-colored glasses, distrust, frustration-colored glasses, so many of us wake up and we're unconscious of the fact that, number one, we're putting on a filter. Number two, we're not actively participating in the filter. So my query is, what if we could recognize the filter, choose the filter, and then live life through that filter and maybe one day get to a no-filter world?
Wow. Just reflecting on this. When you go to sleep after making that declaration, how do you feel as you're falling?
I feel complete. I have zero fear of death. It was funny enough, Kabbalistically, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a Passover celebration. And you were supposed to eat one of the things that you do Kabbalistically, and there's spiritual reasons. And none of this is religious, it's all spiritual. And you're supposed to eat horseradish on like lettuce or endive. And most people are sitting there and they're sweating and eyes and tears are coming down their eyes. And I tell my teacher, I said, David, I'm eating this horseradish and nothing's happening. And he's like, show me. And so I like smother horseradish all over this piece of endive and I'm like, nothing's happening. He's the reason most people cry or have a reaction to it is because they're afraid of death. You have no fear of death. And so I go to bed with I'm perfectly happy. And I tell people this all the time, Nick. I have almost died more times than I can count. I was suicidal, tried to commit suicide 3 times, 2 times very close to being successful when I was 18 and 20 years old. I've almost died of drug overdoses. I was hanging upside down in a car accident, literally 16 years old, hanging on top of a ravine. The car is crumpled. I'm hanging on by my seatbelt. I climbed up the side of the ravine, not a scratch on me. So I am completely ready to die at any moment. The fact that I've lived this long, I was talking to my parents. My dad is exactly 30 years older than me. And my dad just had his 72nd birthday. And I said, Dad, did you ever think you'd make it this far? He's like, nope. I said, I didn't think I'd make it this far either. Yeah, we didn't think you'd make it this far either. But I say that because I have no fear. If I were to die in this moment, Nick, I'm complete. The people I love know I love them. I have no foes. I have nobody I wish ill will against. I'm perfectly content to die in this moment.
Yeah, it's a beautiful realization. You come to this with that. I had experience at a plant medicine journey recently.
Yeah.
Where I was vomiting. And when you're in these experiences, usually what we do is we let go of the bad.
Yeah.
Or whatever we label to be that way. And so as I'm vomiting out all the stuff and it's coming out the way it does during the purge, I come back like, oh, I feel so good. And then I hear a message that, no, let out the good too.
Ooh.
I was like, what? I just start going. I have this vision of all my past lives, everything, all the good things, all the love, all the incredible moments, all my friends, everything just come out of me. And I sat back and I looked up and I just saw this massive mandala. And I became one with it. And I completely was immersed. So at peace. Didn't know who I was, didn't know where I was. And just for 20 minutes, I sat there in perfect harmony. Couldn't be happier to be there. And the shaman came over, grabbed my shoulder, come back. He's like, you need to come back now. And it was the peace I felt. And just letting everything go, not just the bad stuff, not labeling it, but everything in its wholeness felt incredible. And since that moment, I haven't feared death.
That's
genuinely.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing feeling.
It's freeing. Don't you wish you could give that to everybody? It's like the magic pill. If you go back to the Matrix, for anybody who's seen it, it's like red pill, blue pill. It's once you realize that we are all things and no things. When Dawn and Deepak and I were talking about conscious agents last week, Dawn was saying that not all conscious agents project into space-time. So the idea is that space-time is projection of conscious agents, but what maybe doesn't project into space-time might be dark matter, etc. And I was just saying all the souls of humanity. Like if all there is consciousness, we're only popping into this particular experience of reality. And our consciousness is just showing up here in what we call space-time, in the theater of space-time. But really, there is no death. There is no anything. All there is consciousness infinitely.
And you are somebody else, another thing I admire about you, who edges on the spiritual and the technological. Like when you're speaking to these physicists, you're talking to engineers. And someone with a background in software engineering who's also a spiritual path and witnessing somebody else embrace both of these seemingly different fields of study and blending them together so beautifully has been amazing to witness.
That track agreed.
What has been some of your favorite conversations talking to these engineers and integrating that with your spirituality and tracking it back to some of these insights?
I would say, Nick, that when you look at this, all things are the same. It's like we just label things, whether you label it technology, whether you label it spirituality. That's why the series that Deepak and Dawn and I have done together is called Conversations at the Intersection of Cutting Edge Science and Spirituality. And that's what I love. Like, for example, Kabbalist there's a great Kabbalistic book called Nano that explains how the Zohar, which is this ancient text that predates all religions, explained quantum physics 3,000 years ago. Like it actually references the pages. So what I find amazing about this is seeing how spirituality is embedded in science, even if sometimes there might be resistance in the scientific community. And yet spirituality also has a scientific element. It's all one. I think where we get into trouble, Nick, is in seeing separation. There's a group I'm a part of called the unitive narrative. And this is a funny example. You'll appreciate this being in Portugal. Have you ever noticed a dog poop on the ground, Nick, in Portugal? So coming from a separation-based consciousness, like you versus me, bad person, this person is bad for leaving their doggy doo-doo on the ground. One day I had this epiphany. I'm out walking my dog. I have poopy bags on me, and I come across a heaping pile of poop, right? And the natural reaction is to be like, what jerk left this pile of poop here, right? And poop, again, we're talking metaphors. We're not just talking about poop on a Lisbon street, but this is also metaphorical, is then to look at and say, what if this isn't you versus me? What if this is us? And in that moment, I'm not going to lie, Nick, poop, even my own dog's poop is the last thing on earth I want to touch. But it didn't matter. In that moment, now I've started picking up other people's poop because it's all ours. And I think the more that we move away from this science versus spirituality, this yours versus mine, and into more of a unitive narrative, turns out we evolved to cooperate, not to compete. Evolution, Darwinian by natural selection, was an artifact that pops out, but it's not who we are. I think it's just what we needed as a society to get to this place because our souls chose this. Just the other day, I was scanning Zohar, and there was this beautiful part about, if you ever play a game, have you ever played soccer, or have you ever seen a soccer game? So if you're playing a soccer game, imagine you're playing a soccer game, but there's no goalie. Is that a game? If you're just kicking a ball in a net, is that still a game?
In a way, because you compete for rank. It's a status game.
You could, but if you're the one playing, you're just kicking a ball in a net. There's not much of a game because you need a goalie there in order to challenge you. So Kabbalistically, they were talking about this in the Zohar. Our evil inclination, the ego, whatever you want to call it, is our goalie. We each chose our parents, our obstacles, our goalie to challenge us so that our vessels, our souls could grow larger and contain more and more light.
The story of the poop, I find quite funny because a lot of my Portuguese friends, I've heard this from many of them. When we walk by the poop on the street, and this is very common in Portugal.
Yes, I apologize. If you ever come, Portugal's amazing, minus the poop on the street.
Well, I mean, but it's funny because you know what they say?
What?
It's good luck.
What?
The Portuguese say the poop, when you see it, is good luck. So the unifying narrative of the Portuguese around poop, and I've heard this, and I don't know if this is universal, but from 3 of my Portuguese girlfriends have said to me, that is good luck. It is good luck when you see the poop on the street.
Of all the things, when I woke up this morning and the topics I thought we were going to talk about, you telling me, by the way, Jen, in Portugal, poop on the street is good luck is so far out on the realm of possibilities. And you got to love that, though. It's like the infinite possibilities. I would have never guessed that.
And we always label this as something that's being inherently wrong. But what the perspective that they choose to believe is, hey, thank you for leaving me that shit. It's a good shit.
Oh, yeah, I'm still wrapping my head around that. That is, what a cool thing. Thank you for telling me that. Now I'm going to be even more appreciative. Now, do I pick it up? That's the next question. Here I was trying to help everyone out, although I'm taking away their good luck.
Yeah, you're missing, like the Portuguese are missing out on some good luck that day. So even the narrative that we choose to subscribe to, the lens that we choose to put on when we witness these sort of, we label as tragedies or label as an abomination, with the right lens put on top of it and the right collective story, it actually can turn to something that adds to the narrative and becomes something that we can alchemize into beauty, even though it's literal shit.
But is it even literal shit? That's a whole other thing. Is everything is technically like metaphors. According to my friend Don, he wrote a book, The Case Against Reality, Why Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes. And do you want to know what statistically the probability is that we're seeing the truth of something? 0. There is a 0% chance that we are seeing the truth. So that's it. Who knows if it's even poop? We could turn that poop into gold. I think there's going to be a time in the not so distant future, God turned water into wine, we can turn poop into gold.
Yeah, we have this inherent belief that this is actually the universe around us. As if our little brains and this little piece of bone and like through our perspective of these very limited senses is somehow in some way an accurate reflection of what's actually happening here. And it's such a limited perspective, right? We get so married and attached to these senses, the way we pick up things. And I agree with you. I don't feel like truth has been discovered in any format. Yeah.
There's just truth for you in the moment, in a piece of music, the taste of chocolate, the drop of dew on a flower in the morning. There's truth in every moment for you. But just because it's your truth doesn't mean that it has to be the truth. And I think that's where wars are created. I think that's where pain and suffering comes from, is arguing over truth. Truth is subjective.
Yeah, fully depends on the perspective. It depends on the senses. My father, he's both ways colorblind.
What does that mean?
He literally sees the world in black and white. And I always find it fascinating when even we're looking at the color scheme of something or a beautiful sunrise. Some people might label it as beautiful, but from his perspective, it's a whole different experience. Even the way that we see things is fundamentally different than the person next to us. And I grew up with the knowledge of the way that I'm witnessing this is so different than that of my father's.
You remind me of a story. A dear friend of mine, when I was going through a divorce about 5 years ago, I couldn't have gotten through it without him, Dr. Mark Golston in Los Angeles. And we're sitting there one day, and at that time in my life, I didn't know Nick, but Mark, and I had somebody else after that, diagnosed me as being Aspian, having Aspergers. And when this happened, like my whole life, I was like, oh my gosh, that's why I felt like an alien. It felt like Nick got a book on how to be a normal human being, and Jen and Bob and all these other people, everybody else except me, got a book on how to be quote unquote normal. Because I was always saying things when I was younger, and I was causing people so much harm. Childhood friends, people I worked with in my early years, I just didn't know how to read social cues. I didn't know how to empathize. I didn't understand all of this. So it's been 20 years of spiritual work and self-understanding and understanding of the other. And then Mark tells me this, and then I verified it, and I felt heard and known as I read more about it. One day, Mark and I are sitting in his office, and he's sharing with me where he had been on a 48-hour shift at UCLA, a famous psychiatrist, and he's sitting there with a woman who's suicidal, and he had been trying to help her for the longest time. And he was just being with her. Like, imagine, like, talking about your dad and his perspective. Yeah. He's just sitting and he's being with this woman. And then all of a sudden, Mark said, the color drained out of the room. Mark was so there with this woman that in that moment, he saw the world from her perspective. Not that she was colorblind, but that the world had no color, had no taste, had no feeling, anything for her. And in that moment, he had been treating her for months. He looked her in the eye and he said, I understand why you want to kill yourself. It's okay. And she looked up, and for the first time in her whole life, she felt known. And that was the catalyst that had her decide not to kill herself, was having somebody else go to that dark, deep place where she felt so alone and so afraid, that having somebody else sit with her for even a moment in that place, just like even you having compassion for your dad. It's like when we can sit with another person in that pain and that agony and just hold space for them, you can heal.
Yeah, it's a moment of shared resonance. It's like I've been vibrating this frequency for so long that nobody else shares. For the first time, even for a moment, it feels like somebody's vibrating there with me. I would love to double click on your quote unquote diagnosis, as people call it. What superpowers come with this incredible gift that you've been given?
It's funny you say that. I'm actually giving a talk in 2 weeks in Croatia about the logic puzzle life, the superpowers I've learned from having Aspergers of understanding human connection. So my first company was in building and selling a legal recruiting company. And that was my gift. Since I was very young, I could meet person A and meet person B, because what I didn't realize is it is a superpower. I am just running data points and running numbers of who's motivated by, like, your birthday was July 1st, and then you're this type of, and just like my brain is just running through this all the time. So for an average person, they might not, for example, be running pattern recognition of every pattern they've ever seen. Now, it's exhausting sometimes. It makes it hard to go to sleep because I have such an abundance of information bouncing around in my brain. Though what's amazing about it is that it allows me to connect people in a more meaningful way. That's how we came to create the algorithm from our new company, is that we spent 8 months analyzing my intuition and coming up with questions to mirror that, to match people, and to measure how much variability is tolerable from person A to person B. And having been somebody who really struggled with that, it helped me to just understand human beings, because I'll put it this way, Nick, the greatest superpower I have out of this is because I understood the zero, zilch, and nada about human beings, let alone about myself. That caused me to painstakingly study every person I ever met for the last 2-3 decades, and then to compile that and create an amalgamation of what motivates us as human beings, and to be, I would say, even more sensitive. I was on the phone with one of my best friends. We do an accountability call every day at 6 p.m. my time, 10 a.m. her time. And we were talking about how sometimes they can say people on the spectrum might not be as empathetic. And she's, Jen, my experience of you is you are even more caring than most people, because I was always saying the wrong thing, Nick. I was always making faux pas. Had friends who would no longer want to be friends because I would say things that would be off color or off-putting, but it just wasn't in my repertoire of not acceptable things. Nobody taught me that. And so that taught me to be so extremely meticulous and thoughtful of other people's, considerate of other people's needs, other people's wants, etc., that it's cultivated me into being a much more thoughtful person. Now, do I still say things that might sometimes hurt somebody inadvertently? I'm a human being, though I now have the wherewithal where when I go to bed every night, I say to my husband, did I cause you pain today? Because I might have missed something. And I reflect on every person I met that day and I ask myself, did I cause anybody else pain? And so it's like rerunning the algorithm every day of my brain of how do I tweak it? I call it spiritual accounting. How do I tweak it every night? So that way today I'm going to be a little bit more light, be a little bit kinder to myself and others.
So before you go to bed, you have a reverse movie of your day.
Yeah.
Or is it from morning to night? Or is it from night into morning?
It's more morning to night, I would say.
And so when you find something that, you take account for, do you make a note of it? Or what's the next steps in doing so?
Yeah, absolutely. Every single day on my phone, I look at how could I live today better? I look at, did I cause people pain? Did I rush through things? Was I on my phone? Were there things that I intended that I didn't accomplish? So it's everything from the being, the ontological, was I insensitive to somebody, to the doing of something maybe I wish I would have done that I didn't do. And then there's, what am I proud of myself for? This is such an important component. And so you look at, what am I proud of myself for that somebody might not ever even know? Did I refrain from saying something? Did I open a door for somebody? Did I do something spiritually that nobody else is going to give me a pat on the shoulder for, but I can acknowledge myself? And that, honestly, is a secret to life. Acknowledge yourself. Give yourself the love. Give yourself the attention you need. And then you will be the sexiest person on the planet because you're not trying to take energy from people. That's why we all feel so exhausted emotionally, mentally, and physically. Because so many of us, I want your attention. Social media, please like me, please do this. But if I love myself, it's just a bonus. If you happen to like something I say, great, but I don't need you for my own validation to like it. And then the final part of that spiritual accounting is, what am I grateful for? And actually, the other thing that I do is I look at miracles. Every day, I ask God or the universe to grant me 30 or more miracles, and I write them down every day. So as I go through the day, it used to be 19, and I've since upped it in the last few months to 30. And so then I write down every miracle as they happen.
And I love your relationship to miracles. Do you feel like when you witness a miracle, do you feel like it's a matter of perspective or?
Absolutely, it's a matter of perspective. I think that from a neuroscience, there's two sides to it. There's the spiritual side, and then there's the scientific side. And I love, again, how these two become beautifully intertwined. From the spiritual side, it is our perspective. It is, do I even acknowledge that as a miracle? Yesterday, for example, I wanted to surprise my husband and take him to the Algarve because we had never been. And so I was looking at it for our anniversary. And as I was literally looking at that, in that moment, one of my girlfriends texts and says, hey, I have this beautiful mansion in the Algarve for 3 weeks. Do you guys want to come down and hang out? And I was like, what? That's amazing. Now, here's the cool part on the scientific side. From a neuroscience standpoint, moment by moment, Nick, we have billions of bits of information every second bombarding us. Sights, smells, touches, etc. But our conscious mind only pays attention to 50 to 140 bits, depending on which scientist you ask. So the question is, what happens to all those other billions of bits? The analogy I like to use is it's like you're walking around in an infinite dark stadium. It just goes on forever. It's pitch black. And all you, Nick, or you have is a little itty bitty miner's helmet with a little light. So all you're going to see is whatever direction that your head is pointing. That's the only thing you're going to see in that moment. So from a scientific standpoint, if I'm looking for miracles, of all the billions and billions of things that I could be looking for, observing moment by moment, if I set my intention, if I set that little miner helmet to look for miracles, then my brain is naturally going to look for that.
You notice it because it's explicitly what you're looking for. And even in the poop.
Yeah.
It's like you see a miracle in the poop and all the different reflections on it. And we call in what we put our intention towards. I've been thinking about this. Even the word attention and intention literally means to be in tension with something. I'm explicitly choosing to be tied to that tension, which is going to bring me to that specific point. So if you feel the tension of yourself being pulled into miracles and creating that sort of effect, then you're naturally going to find it because you are explicitly calling that tension in.
Beautiful. I would have never thought of that.
Yeah. What are the other things that you feel that you are in tension with?
I am intentional about everything. I set down every day. It's so funny, I teach classes on this, but I set every day my daily intentions. So I set intentions from even who I want to be today. How do I want the interview to go? Do I want to be playful? Do I want to be fun? Do I want to be thoughtful? So I always set an ontological intention. I have 3 interviews today. I have this one with you. I have one at 9 o'clock tonight. I have one at 7 o'clock tonight. But the thing is, I'm not choosing the same for each one. I'm thinking about, who do I intend to be of service the most to Nick's audience? Who do I intend to be of service the most to Tom or Anya's audience? And so I set an intention ontologically of who I want to be. Then from a more business standpoint, I set intentions of the 3 things that I'm intending to do. Like we are so lucky. We just signed 3 magical medical advisors for our new company. And so one of my intentions today, that was my number one to get done, was to get their advisory agreements out to them. So I'm so grateful for that. So that was a physical thing that I wanted to get done, like an action in the world that I wanted to get done. So it's a mixture of all my spiritual things. I have 20, 30 spiritual things: journaling, inner child work, meditation, prayer, chanting. I write all of this down. Stretching. I stretch every day. So I list all of these down, talking to my parents, having a loving call with them. So from every moment of the day, having a loving and connected day with my husband, enjoying delicious food. And so I set daily intentions, weekly intentions, monthly and annual intentions.
Yeah, you're choosing explicitly what to dance with. And one thing I find really fascinating is, as we enter into this age of AI, there's this emerging position called the prompt engineer. So you describe to the prompt or to the AI, you say, hey, you are, for example, Einstein, and you're here to advise me on how love permeates through the glucon and like all these different things. And you'll actually receive a response based on the prompts that are provided to the artificial intelligence. And when I have this look at that, I'm like, based on your experience you share with me, I ask, is that invented or is that discovered? It's almost in a way you are prompt engineering the guides and the spirits in a way that they how to behave in order to guide you to where you need to go. And even in a way, it feels like you're prompt engineering your higher self and changing the prompt based on the context of what you find yourself to make yourself the most in service.
It's beautiful. I would have never thought of it that way. I was teaching a class a couple of months ago on ChatGPT, and my co-founder and I, who were doing this particular talk, we were saying, listen, whether you love it or hate it, AI is going to teach us to be better communicators because it directly shows you if you miscommunicate something, it's going to reflect it back to you. And so I think that all AI, to your point, has to do with the prompter. Who is giving the prompt? What are you asking for? And I think it's a metaphor, Nick, for our relationships, our business partnerships. It's a direct mirror. For the first time ever, we are having mirrored to us how clearly are we communicating or not.
Yeah, and almost it's funny because when I think about it, like a prompt is like being intention. Like I want to be in tension with this other being who I'm communicating with. And you can be in tension with whatever you choose to through the prompts that you choose to engineer. I'm going to ask you a question that I don't think many people could really dive into too deeply. What do you feel like is the relationship between this emergence of artificial intelligence and spirit?
It's a beautiful question, and it's one that's getting discussed by a lot of brilliant minds, yourself included. Let me stop in, because I can feel sometimes, Nick, what my human mind wants to answer, and then I like to tap into deeper things. So if I were to say, what is the relationship between spirit, spirituality, and AI? It's beautiful. I just heard it's a manifestation of both the good and the bad. It's a manifestation of all of our greatest fears and our greatest aspirations that are going to be shown to us in the world because we have a fear of inadequacy. So many of us as human beings have a fear of not being good enough, being inadequate. Now here comes AI, and many people are afraid for their survival. Will I be made irrelevant? What does this mean for me? I'm in marketing. Now copy or ChatGPT can do better than me. You know, you have graphic artists, and now you have Canva or whomever, Adobe, that can create things that used to be something that somebody paid. And so I think that what we're being challenged to do is to meet our greatest fears. In the same way I was mentioning earlier about expanding our vessel to be able to contain more light, because we're going into this age of Aquarius, Nick, we are being called to be able to hold more space, more light than ever before. And so what that's going to look like is a complete breakdown and collapse of all of the old structures, old economic structures, business structures, education structures, and a rebuilding and a rebirth of something new. Now, it's like all things, anything could be labeled as good or bad. If you see a thing as good, it could be considered good. If you see a thing as bad, it could be considered bad. So what's the harm for looking for the good in everything? So I think the more that we approach AI from a place of fear, it's the same, I would say, with AI or being in love. This is a weird analogy that just dropped in for me. Let's say that you have a fear of relationships. It's no different than a fear of AI. It's the fear of the thing that challenges you, that is going to provoke you to grow. A beautiful song from Andy Grammer that he wrote for one of his children said, "I wish you pain." It's in those moments. It's not the moments where we're sitting meditating on a mountain and a beautiful sunrise is happening and dewdrops are falling around us. No, that's not the moment. We might have an insight there, but it's the moments where we feel crushed, we feel afraid, we have to rebuild ourselves and reconstruct ourselves stronger than before. And I think that what AI is doing is it's a manifestation of our own consciousness. Like even if we were to go back to Don's theory on conscious agents, actually Deepak and Don and I were speaking about this at the end of the interview. Conscious agents are themselves the creator of AI. It's just it's all in harmony. So if you see anything as an adversary, you're going to have a very different relationship. If you have a fear of relationships, you're going to carry that fear into everything you do. And so I think that what we're being challenged to do mentally, emotionally, and spiritually during this revolution and this renaissance, if you will, of artificial intelligence that is being birthed, I guess I would say, in the world, is that we're being given an opportunity to dance with our fears, delight in our fears, and to just see that there is nothing to fear. There's nothing.
Yeah, I hear you. I feel like it's going to be everything everywhere all at once.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah.
It's my favorite movie.
It's a great movie.
Best movie of all time. I met a woman named Dr. Cynthia Sue Larson who wrote a book called Quantum Jumps. And I got to interview her right after that came off. And I was like, so basically you can quantum jump from one reality to another. And I think that's what we're all doing, Nick. Like our consciousness, your and my consciousness is jumping into this reality right now because this is where our soul wants to learn lessons. Yeah. I could just as easily quantum jump into another reality where maybe AI isn't as prevalent. It's like our souls are choosing this moment in time, this inflection point of AI, because we asked to grow in this area. That's why our consciousness is showing up here.
Yeah, we have this principle in software engineering where if you feel like there needs to be a change in the repository of the code base, you can branch off of it.
Yeah.
Just by typing this simple command and asking for it, you can actually create a whole new version, a whole new timeline that is tied to the original, but is very unique to it. So I've been playing with this idea of quantum jumps too. And
read her book, Quantum Jumps, if you have not. So one of the stories she tells, and this one just boggles my mind. I'm spiritual. You heard the Einstein story. She said, one day I think she was out of nutmeg, right? So she goes in her kitchen, she's out of nutmeg. Want to know what she did, Nick? She walked in and out of her kitchen. She didn't go to the grocery store until she jumped back into the timeline where her nutmeg was refilled. Hello. How epic is that?
Wow. I feel like this is where a massive unraveling is going to happen. The messages that I got is that we are stepping out of the age of technology into the age of light. And this is going to be where all this transcendence, all the science, all of the technology comes into play, and AI is going to be the translation layer between it. It understands everything everywhere all at once. So we can ask it certain questions and ask it to produce things that were previously left to the realms of magic. We actually talk about making quantum leaps. Like we can actually spin up thousands and thousands of artificial intelligence to work on that specifically. The best physicists in the world, the best software engineers, the best material scientists in the world to just work on that specific problem in the context of a digital twin with all information available to that little metaverse. So now what's going to be able to happen simply by us dictating and saying, abracadabra, as I say, so it becomes, we can spin up entire worlds of study and basically manifest whatever it is that we choose to.
I believe it. I think a lot of us have already been dabbling in that. Magic is just what science can't explain. And I think magic is what many of us have been living with our whole lives. Magic is our words. I love that you use abracadabra. My dear friend Jocelyn Herman-Saccio says that all the time. With our words, we create. With our consciousness, infinite universes are available.
And how do you choose, in all the things I know that you're exposed to and that you actively lean into, how do you choose which magic to integrate?
It's a beautiful question. I was reflecting on that this morning. So as I mentioned, I've been studying Zohar. It was so weird. One day, about 2 weeks ago, 10 days, 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting down and I was doing something. And then all of a sudden I heard, you need to start scanning Zohar 30 minutes a day. Now, that had not been a part of my practice since 2020 when I was during COVID and writing my second book, and I was doing it and having all this deep wisdom versus chanting. Like I would chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo every day. And I noticed that as we evolve, our practices evolve, and some might fall away, and they might fall away for a little bit, or they might fall away forever. And it's to be fluid with them. And so, for example, now who would think you have an extra 30 minutes every day? I certainly, if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, do you have an extra 30 minutes laying around every day to scan Zohar? I would have probably guessed no. However, in the 10, 14 days that I've been doing this now consistently, the miracles, I mean, I already had lots of miracles, but the miracles, the wisdom, the insights that are raining down upon me are incredible. And it was very flow-based for me. All of a sudden one day, I think I was in prayer, and that's when I heard it, to start scanning Zohar 30 minutes a day to create more miracles. And then I picked that up, and then I put chanting down. Doesn't mean I'll never pick up chanting again. And it doesn't mean I'll scan Zohar every day for the rest of my life for 30 minutes, but who knows?
Beautiful. So I'm going to throw a word out.
Okay.
That was advised to put into this interview.
Okay.
Tijuana.
Which time is the question?
That's all the context I was given.
Remember how I said there were many times I almost died in my early youth? That was each of the times I went to Tijuana. Which time do you want me to start with? The time I lost a shoe and went back across the border without one shoe? The time that I wound up at the #1 drug lord's house in Tijuana? Which story do you want first?
I would say whichever you feel called to share, because all these sound amazing and I want to hear every one of them.
Yeah, so it's when I was younger, I was such a good girl. I don't know if anybody has ever had this experience, but honestly, Nick, I was like a good girl. There was basically an angel over my head. I was like straight A student, never did anything wrong, was perfect. And then I went to the dark side. So I was like up until the age of about 14 or 15, I was goody two shoes. And then one night, drugs, rock and roll, alcohol, all kind of descended upon me simultaneously. And one of my friends, we won't get into names, we'll just call her Bob. This friend of mine, Bob, my parents were not a big fan of because she loved to party and everybody loved her. And we always hung out and did all these things. We had this group of friends, right? And this group of friends one day, they invited us, growing up in San Diego, Tijuana is right across the border and you don't have to be 21 to drink. So it's like a dream come true for a 17, 18-year-old. And on this particular time, I just remember that I was invited to go across the border. I didn't even know where we wound up. And we wind up like at this person's house who is on top of a hill in Tijuana. And there's like cockfights going on, like meaning the roosters that put razors on them. It was just like, that was scarring enough. And then somehow or another later that night, it was all a blur. We wind up like down on the beach and there are just tables of like cocaine and everything. How I lived through that night, Nick, is beyond me. Like literally, I don't know how I survived it. Now, there were many other fun times. One of my best girlfriends, Em, who I love and adore, she and I worked at a restaurant together. And so every now and again, it'd be like Friday night after work and we'd be like, we love to dance. We'd be like, let's go dancing. And I just remember we're at one of the, I don't know, Mr. Frog, Senior Frogs, one of those sorts of places down in Tijuana. And we're dancing, we're in our dresses, and I had these candies, high heels on. They were like a popular thing in the early 2000s. And somehow or another, my shoe falls off. Like people are squirting champagne on us and we're like champagne on us, and then my shoe is gone. And somebody down below has kept my shoe as a souvenir. Wow. And now I have to cross the Tijuana border. So I have my friend Emily, who's the same size as me, if not smaller. And she gave me a piggyback ride across the border. So since I had no shoes, so not the most exciting story ever, but it was pretty funny because people look at me as being spiritual and they think, oh, she would never do anything like that. But
And what was the rubber band effect for you when you were going to the shadow that shot you back to the light?
So great question. I can tell you the exact moment that it happened. I was in my early 20s. And as I said, I'd gone to the dark side, to the shadow side for 5, 6, 7 years, drugs, alcohol, everything in between. Mm-hmm. And I went to a class called Landmark Worldwide. Have you ever heard of it, Nick?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like a personal development class. And my boyfriend at the time, his best friend, had gifted it to he and his brother. And so we had been dating 3 months, and he goes and he does the class. And if you had ever met somebody who did it, people get really excited. Oh, it's the best thing ever. You got to do this thing, Nick, right? So I go, and I finally, at first, he tries to get me to do it. My boyfriend tries to get me to do it for 5, 6 months. And I was like, no, you can't make me, right? And so I am just being petulant and petty about it. And fast forward, it's now 5, 6 months after he's done it, and I decide to do the class. Do you want to know why I decided to do the class, though, Nick? To prove that it was a crock of shit. So that was my come from. Talk about your intention behind a class. So I want you to envision, it's day 1 of a 3-day, all weekend long class. And I show up, and you have about 150 people in a room outside of LAX. And they're all there to get transformed in their life. And there are these 2 people co-facilitating it, an older man and a tall Aussie woman. And so the man begins the class and says, does anybody have any questions about how this weekend's going to go? Yes? You over there in the Von Bitch shirt? I kid you not. I was wearing like this fuchsia shirt that says in script Von Bitch on it. And I was like, yes. How would you respond to the fact that this, meaning the class, is a cult? And the guy looks at me, gives a little chuckle. If it is a cult, it's the best damn cult you'll ever join. Next question. So fast forward, Nick, that weekend, people are having breakthroughs in their family, in their relationships. Erstwhile, I am stewing in self-righteousness. I am bulimic. I'm drinking too much at the time. I'm miserably unhappy with my life and a jerk to a lot of people around me. And yet I was like, you have problems and you have problems, but I have my shit figured out. So fast forward, it's the end of the weekend. And my boyfriend and his brother and friends and so forth who have done it get to be there. And they're so excited to see how I've transformed, right? Mm-hmm. And so the woman who was co-facilitating comes up at the end and she says, are you going to do the advanced class? And I looked at her and I said, sweetheart, darling, it was stifling enough having sat in this room the last 3 days. Do you really think I would put myself through this hell again? She looks at my boyfriend, who shrugs and says, took her 8 months just to do this one. You know those moments, Nick, where there's before and after? That moment you just said, what was it that sprung me back from the dark? I looked at my boyfriend and I said, this is an at-will relationship. You can leave anytime you want. In that moment, my life was forever changed. She said, the woman, the tall Australian woman, looked at me and she said, can I be really straight with you? And I said, sure, darling, go ahead, be really straight with me. She said, you are a nasty thing. You are one of the most powerful women I have ever come across in my life. Except you know what? You are like Godzilla with a huge tail swinging behind you, knocking down buildings wherever you go. Except guess what? Those are not buildings that you're destroying. Those are people's lives. She looks at my boyfriend and she says, leave her. It's what she needs. And walked away. In that moment, Nick, I thought I was a good person. Like I gave to charity, I volunteered my time. There's what you don't know in that moment. So after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I went the next day to my office. And I was curious if this was true, if she was just trying to BS me. So I went into the office. I could feel, you know how you feel a little kernel of truth in something. And there were about 25, 30 people in the company, and it was our morning meeting. And I was already pretty successful at the company. I was very young, 23 years old. And so right before our meeting, I said sheepishly, guys, have I ever been condescending or demeaning or maybe mean to any of you? The office went so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Then Adrian Barbie, who had no problem saying things as it was, burst out laughing and says my old nickname, which is J Hill. J Hill, you are only the most condescending, demeaning bitch we've ever met in our lives, and we have no idea how you're successful. That was the catalyst for 20 years of work. It was the greatest gift. She's still a friend of mine to this day.
From both of these women to point these things out in you.
Yeah.
When I had friends say something to me, so I used to think you're an asshole for telling me things, but I realize you're not the asshole. It's the people who don't tell me things. They're the assholes. And coming from a place of radical honesty, and the things that we see in people and the things that, like these character flaws, it's such a gift when you have somebody who's willing to have the courage to penetrate you in these ways from a place of genuine care and concern, right? It's like, I think that we have this tendency to avoid this sort of conflict, but man, when you have the opportunity to lay it on somebody in a way that is pointing them out, it is an opportunity for a pivot. Because your whole world is just like collapses. Your whole identity collapses in the face of what this person has just shared with you. And it sounds like you've got a couple of these simultaneously. So,
It was very powerful. I was piggybacking on that. I then pursued spirituality, pursued personal transformation for decades after that. And one of the other things that came out of a landmark class, it's a combination of that and some other things I learned, was this exercise where you go ask 5 people 6 questions. At the time, I think it was 4, and I've added a few since then, which was, what was your first impression of me when we met? Where have I surprised you? Where have I disappointed you? And what is your impression of me now? And I've since added some new variations to it. And I will say, I did this, and I remember my masseuse, who's still a friend years later, Natalia. I said, Natalia, what was your first impression of me when we met? She said, I thought you were a bitch. And I was like, okay. I said, where have I surprised you? She said, when I got to know you and I found out what a warm heart you had. And that just floored me. And it really took me decades of cultivating self-worth and loving myself and appreciating myself to stop being verbally abusive to myself and others. It was just what was mirrored to me as a child. And unfortunately, you mirror what around you. And I didn't know that it wasn't acceptable. I didn't know it wasn't okay to speak to myself or others that way. Often those of us who are the most bitchy, jerky, whatever you want to call it, it's because we're that way to ourselves. If you lived inside my head during those years, nobody would tolerate. I'm surprised I made it through.
And so that was your inflection point into this space. And when we come into this world, and I guess it's like this whole world of spirituality and of business and all these different mixed up things, and I find that we have this tendency to become this reflection of this. For myself, especially, I'm totally guilty of this. It's like my life becomes a self-help book. Where everything I do is lined up in such a way where it's all here to serve, quote unquote, my higher self. You're also somebody I admire because you like to have fun. I've been to your parties, your wild parties.
And talk about that.
So, you know, this beautiful contrast between entrepreneur, spiritual innovator, as well as
Dancing Queen.
Dancing Queen, yeah. It's like when it feels like you found so much comfort in all these different archetypes of your persona. What are the things that you do to keep these things in resonance and in balance?
It all comes down to my inner child. She keeps me in check. Every day I check in with her and I might ask, sweetheart, what do you need today? What matters to you? And sometimes she'll tell me how she feels. If I'm being jerky to somebody now as an adult 42-year-old woman, she'll keep me in check. If I'm not being my kindest self, she'll be like, I didn't like it when you were being meanie pants to this person. So I'll check in with her. The dancing side came out of her. I used to feel so embarrassed, Nick, years ago, because I was made fun of for dancing. I was a cheerleader in high school, and I'll always remember this moment. The cheerleading coaches said, you're only as good as your weakest link, which is Jen. So I had this whole story about how I was this horrible dancer, blah, blah, blah. And then one day, about 4 or 5 years ago, I started doing inner child work. And I said, sweetheart, what matters to you? What do you want? She said, I want to dance. And Nick, one of my favorite moments of my life, I was having a unicorn onesie 40th birthday party in I think it was 2020 or 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember walking my dog in the streets of Lisbon in my unicorn onesie while dancing. And my soul was just so happy and so free. So I didn't even realize I had suppressed that desire to dance. And I think that it's like everything. If you do too much, if you work too much, if you dance, if you do anything too much, it's going to throw your life out of balance. So it's about checking in with yourself to see how much space you have for these different areas of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. So how much of your day are you dedicating to attunement?
To what?
Attunement. And we talk about bringing in the miracles into your inner child, into all these beautiful practices. How much of your day do you dedicate to that space to come into attunement with what you're calling in?
2 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. 2 hours. People ask me all the time, that's why I teach classes. I have a miracle making class. Strangers ask me, how do you live the life of your dreams? And it's my dream, Nick. My dream is for every one of us to wake up and live a life filled with love and passion and joy. It was actually a plant medicine ceremony a few years ago where I had never done a ceremony of any sort. And it was my first time doing psilocybin. And all of a sudden, one of my favorite parts of my meditation and my practice is that I radiate out what's called Kabbalistically the 72 names of God, names, ancient wisdom of love, prosperity, soulmate energy, fertility, whatever people need. So I have this list of 100 people I meditate on. So the medicine starts to descend on me in the ceremony a few years ago. And as I just started to feel overwhelming bliss and love and joy, I said, oh, I want to share this. That was the first thought I had. So I started radiating these feelings, radiating out this energy through the 72 names of God. And on that day, Nick, no joke, I just hit a frequency of joy that I had never hit before. And ever since then, now I tie all of these practices into my morning ritual. So I wake up every day. I first journal to ground myself after having just woken up. I love to sit on my terrace and watch the sunrise every day that I can. I let myself wake up naturally. It's very rare unless I have a meeting with one of our clients in Australia. Most days, maybe one day a month, do I wake up to an alarm, and it's just so invigorating. It's just wake up on your own terms, sit down, journal. Then I go into a state where I'll meditate. I do transcendental meditation for 30 minutes, give or take. Then I transition out of that and go into heart-focused breathing, which is a heart math technique. Then I send all of those 72 names of God. Then I spend 5 minutes or so sending love, sending prosperity, sending soulmate energy to people I care about who are on my list, healing energy. Then after that, I ground myself. Then I actually send light down through my body, down to the center of the earth. Then I envision, what do I want for today? Do I want love? Do I want compassion? Do I want peace? And then I envision this beautiful bubble of white light filling up with everything I desire for the coming day. And I imagine that just shooting up my body, up through my crown and resting in my heart. Then I talk to my little girl and I just spend time getting to know her, cultivating what does she need? How can I support her? And then I go on my knees and I talk to God. And I do it on my knees just to stay humble and to ground myself. And I just start talking to God out loud. And I remember my husband one time, we're walking along the water here in Lisbon, and he says to me, honey, what does God sound like? And for me, Nick, it's the sound of, it's like a soft voice that is so quiet, which is why I like to talk to God after my meditation, because you've really cleared out so much of the noise, chatter, etc. So when I tune in and I hear what I call God, the universe, it's such a soft voice, and it comes from my heart, and it's so quiet that you can barely hear it. And sometimes I'll even ask God to repeat things. And when it's my ego, I can tell because it's the head voice. It's louder. It's more there. It's when it's that still, soft, small voice. And then I'll scan Zohar for 30 minutes, and then I'll do other things. So there's just this amalgamation of spiritual soup.
Yeah, the big soup. Yeah, it's amazing, this mix of things, and to witness the results. So this is the most interesting part, at least in my journey, right? It wasn't until we had this certain sense of someone's perception of us making it on the other side. And I had this interesting realization where that's the point of people becoming curious, where you come into your full entrepreneurial prowess while coming into your spirituality. And for people who are aiming to come into both simultaneously, what is your advice to other entrepreneurs on the spiritual path.
Success and satisfaction is something that comes from within. And if you keep looking it out there, you can talk to billionaires, millionaires, people who have it all, right? They have the yachts, they have the this. Though if you don't first cultivate this, all the money in the world will have you feeling empty. I was just speaking with somebody about this the other day, an entrepreneur here in Lisbon. He was having tea at our house. And he said, Jen, I just had the biggest payday. He's a VC, he makes a lot of money. He said, I had the biggest payday of my life a week ago. And it passed in a moment. After 5 minutes, it was just like, here, it was gone. And I realized it didn't mean anything to me. And he said, I was really struggling with that emptiness. And so for any entrepreneurs out there, if you're really asking yourself, how can I build a product, offer a service in the world, and still feel fulfilled? Do the work here. Build from here. Because if you build from here, or a desire to take, yeah, you can have material wealth. You can have cars, boats, trips, whatever you want. But in here, you're going to feel empty.
I recently came back from 3 months in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I shared this with you, but I had this really big realization that there's a direct relationship between my deepest shadow and my yearning, my natural inclination to innovate.
Oh, I love that. No, you didn't tell me that. Tell me more.
I was a part of this amazing program. It's called the Warriors Retreat down in Costa Rica, hosted by Zinnia's incredible entrepreneur, Diego. And it's basically designed to shake you up like a snow globe. And basically on Zinnia, you have every healer you could possibly imagine. And then I happened to have a session with this woman. Her name's Donna. And we did Watsu together. And my specific intention was to go into my childhood memories of me in my bedroom. I wanted to go back to that place. I always ignored that. In all my hypnotherapy and all my meditations and everything, I always avoid that place. It's very scary for me. So as I'm navigating that space, going into it, very explicitly, deliberately, out of nowhere, blossomed this incredible concept. Right in front of my vision, where it's, you can take any article, apply AI to it, and create mosaics for every article on the internet. For every word spoken, we can automatically generate this incredible. And I was like, wait a second. That's not my intention for this experience. So I go back to the shadow. By the way, incredible idea. Thank you, God. Go back in the shadow, go a little bit deeper. Boom. Another blossoming, incredible idea. Happened a second time.
Whoa.
And what I discovered, and this is my big realization in this journey, is that my yearning to innovate as an entrepreneur is a coping mechanism for my deepest shadow. And it always has been.
You would love, Nick, a book by a friend of mine, Melissa Bernstein, called Lifeline. And she shares about it. She became a mentor of mine. I was looking for, I know so many wonderful males. It's like I was just adding our advisory board. It's like all men, like all these great men. And I'm looking for more and more female advisors. So this woman, Melissa Bernstein, co-founded Melissa and Doug Toys. Have you ever heard of them? They're like these famous little wooden toys. And so anyways, but she talks about in the book and in her journey, how she had an existential crisis of meaninglessness, that it was out of complete shadow, out of complete darkness, that the only thing that kept her going was creating toys and creating ways to engage with children more deeply. And so I think you guys would love each other. And it's a beautiful metaphor that out of the darkness does birth the light. Out of the pain does come the healing, the surrender, and the transcendence. I would even go so far as to say.
And yeah, my question becomes, how many entrepreneurs have actually went on this path as a direct result of shadow? And if my shadow is truly the fuel that's alchemizing me into the light and into this innovation, how many of us are stuck in this loop where we're taking our shadow and using that as the fuel to create and not coming from a place of light?
What if the shadow is also light?
Well, that's the intention behind this discovery, right?
Yeah, that's the bigger question. Why does the shadow have to be that? I think the shadow has been the villain or the villainess, right? It's like when one of my best friends, KJ, who we do these calls every day, she reminds me, she's Jen, you are not the evil villain. You just like, we come up with these stories of how Nick's the evil villain, Jen's the evil villainess, whatever it is. And yet it's all labels. that's what we have an opportunity to shed and to let go of, these old systems and structures. There is nothing wrong. Shadow is equally light. You can't have light without dark. You can't have love without hate. There is this beautiful dance of the two.
Mm. Yeah, the only reason light can exist is because of the shadow and vice versa. Yeah. It was a wild trip because what I did is I turned off the new ideas. I actually asked the spirits to stop giving me anything. No new ideas, nothing. And I took all my gifts and all my visualization powers and all my innovation, I put it into my shadow. So if something annoyed me, I marked it and I would sit down and I'd go through regression and pop back into every point in my life where I'd felt that emotion. To every single container and remove those cords. And I made my full-time job for those several weeks going into my own shadow. And I feel one of the things that I feel like I got caught up in for a long time is that there's always an excuse to not go there. I'll call Yehuda, let's talk about this idea, man. I just met this person, I might call any of my entrepreneurial friends, like, talk about this idea, let's talk about AI, let's talk about this innovation. And for a long time, it felt like it's a coping mechanism for me, avoiding going into the place that is the shadow, going into the place that is the real root of the bud of that catalyst of what I have been avoiding. And I agree with you. And I think there's a lot of beauty that came out of it. But what I'm really trying to lean into is like, how is it I can come from the light in everything I do? Not see this as a coping mechanism when I get stressed or when I get scared to create and to change.
I get what you're saying there, yeah.
But really come from a place of light holistically in everything we do.
What I'm hearing for you, Nick, is that first you would have to see yourself as whole and complete with the shadow and the light. There was something that happened to me, happened for me. I don't want to say to me, happened for me years ago. I was planning to do this global meditation. I was sitting on a couch in Paris right before COVID really hit us all. It was March 6th, I think, of 2020. And I'm just enjoying a glass of wine, overlooking the Eiffel Tower, reading Greg Braden's book, Divine Matrix. And all of a sudden it hit me. It's like somebody punched me in the gut. There was a line in the book that said, the square root of 1% of the population meditating at the same time can shift the consciousness of the planet. I was like, that's it. I started calling Deepak, called the Kabbalist Center, called all these people, Awake TV that I knew. I said, guys, we need to do a global meditation. But you know where it was coming from? Shadow. It was coming from darkness. So Deepak says to me, I'll call the Dalai Lama. I'll invite him to be a part of it with us, and so on and so forth. So later that day, I'm in meditation. And I'm meditating, and I love to soul talk with people, alive and dead, like I've mentioned with Einstein. And I start meditating, and I reach out to the Dalai Lama's soul, and I say, Your High Holiness, this is Jennifer. I'm a friend of Deepak's. I wanted to personally invite you. He said he's going to be calling you to invite you to this global meditation we're doing on March 9th. And without missing a beat, Nick, his soul dropped in, and Dalai Lama's like, kind of gives a little chuckle, and he says, thank you so much, Jennifer. First, drop the formalities. You don't have to call me Your High Holiness, and I deeply appreciate the invitation, though my time where it's going to be, I think, was like 12:30 a.m. his time. So I won't be able to be there with you live for the meditation, though I'll be with you in spirit. However, I want you to consider one thing before you do this. And I said, yeah. And he said, if you are doing this because you think the world is broken and needs to be fixed, or that you are broken and something needs to be fixed, you will not be able to make the difference you want to make with this. However, if you can first see the world as whole, complete, and perfect, and yourself as whole, complete, and perfect, it is from that place you'll be able to make the difference you want to make with this. And that's the thing, is that what if we could see ourselves, Nick, and the world and one another in the shadow as all whole, complete, and perfect? It's from that wholeness that then you can create from the light. But if you resist the shadow, if you say bad shadow, wrong shadow, it's from that place that your attention is naturally going to flow inadvertently, as opposed to embracing the shadow, allowing it to be part of the wholeness of the gestalt of who you are as a human being. Then from that place, you can build from the light because you're no longer resisting the dark. Aho.
Yeah. What a message. So I have another thing on my list that I've been asked to ask you. Can you tell us about your Conan story?
Talk about wild miracles, yes. So it was 2013, I think it was. I had written my first book. At the time, I was running this legal recruiting company, and the book was called Stop Hoping, Start Hunting, A Job Seeker's Guide to Finding a Dream Job. Now, at that time, I had the most fabulous publicist, Richard Berman, who used to write for NBC Nightly News. And Nick, it was magic. I was doing TV appearance after TV appearance. Like, I'd show up in New Orleans, be on Fox New Orleans. I'd show up in Chicago, I'd be on NBC, ABC. So he was just getting me all these wonderful interviews. So around this time, as a gift, I bought for my mother-in-law at the time, Conan O'Brien tickets for she and her niece. And I thought, oh, it's an LA thing, it'll be fun. And it was when Conan took over the Tonight Show for Jay Leno. He had just been fired, actually, from the Tonight Show by Jay Leno. So I popped by my office that day before we're about to go see the taping. And I have a great team. This one guy, Scotty Boy, who's like my right hand, he says, Jen, grab a copy of your book for Conan. I was like, Scotty Boy, I know I'm doing a lot of TV appearances right now, but I am not being interviewed on Conan. It's just, I'm going there as an audience member. And he says, you never know. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So I grab a book, a nice big purse. And then I think about it on the way over. I was like, you know what would be funny? If I signed it as a gag to Conan. Good luck one day finding your dream job. Because here he had just been fired by the Tonight Show. So I signed the book and we're waiting in line to get in. And we get in and we have decent seats. And I tell the PA, I said, oh, I brought this as a gag for Conan. Here's a copy of a book. They're just like, you know what? He's such a sweetheart. Conan's so lovely. Sometimes after the show, he'll come up into the audience. And if he does, you can give it to him personally. And if not, just give it to one of us PAs. And I was like, okay, don't think twice about it. Now, to give you a little context, at that point, I am working in legal recruiting. All of my clients are AM Law 100 firms, Fortune 500 companies, very corporate, very conservative. So I'm sitting there. Conan begins his open monologue. It's 5 minutes, 55 seconds in. And he says, do you want to know? Oh, he says, ladies, I have great news. There's a new app out there that teaches men how to orally please you. And I just laughed. I didn't think I laughed any louder or shorter. But all of a sudden, Nick, the camera pans to me and I see myself on the screen and I tried to cover my face laughing. I was like, oh my God. I was like, every corporate client I have is about to fire me. So I'm trying to cover it. And then Conan looks at me, somebody is excited to talk about this. And I'm like, no, like, back off, buddy. And so it turns into this thing. And he starts just like joking with me about it. Meanwhile, he's still on stage. And then he gets to, I don't even know if I should do the joke. And they're like, okay, do the joke. So he does the joke. And then he comes up to hug me. And I was like, dude, you just ruined my career. So I'm going to get you back. So pull the book out of my purse as I hug him, book to camera. And I gave him the book. And he said, she gave me a book to sell. I thought we had a real human connection. And then his friend is, what is happening to the world? Clever marketing. This happens, Nick. And I'm like, please, God, don't let anybody see this. Because I'm like, oh, God, it went viral. I think it has 1.3 million views, something like that. So God forbid, if you're out there, you want to look it up, it's the audience sex app lady and you'll find it. So I'm officially ingrained as the audience sex app lady on YouTube.
That's awesome. Wow. So I deeply appreciate everything. Is there anything you felt compelled to mention? Or any questions I'm not asking, which I should be?
What I'm hearing, Nick, is trust. I think that's the one thing we didn't talk about is it's so important to trust ourselves and to trust that the universe has our backs. One of my dear friends, Moshe Gersht, actually just did a TED Talk that went viral, speaking of which, around this. And he said, there are two ways that we can perceive the world. Either that everything is good and that the universe is good and that the universe has our back, or that it doesn't. And I think that if we can trust ourselves, if we can trust one another, if we can trust the universe, and one of my favorite things, the first plant medicine ceremony I ever did with ayahuasca, I will always remember this. Grandmother told me, everyone is always doing the best they can in every moment. And that includes you. And that's my mantra, Nick, is to trust that in every moment, if somebody's being a jerk and breaks up with you, ghosts you, a boss fires you, somebody's hurtful to you, breaks your heart, what if they were doing the very best they could in that moment? You want to know how we know? That's what they did. Which means given the resources, given the tools, given where they were brought up, given what happened in their history, that is what makes the biggest difference. And you know what I would actually love to do, Nick, is I would love to share. I just got inspired to share this. It's one of my favorite Kabbalistic tools ever. It is called Sweetening Judgment from the 72 Names of God. And if you don't mind, I'd love to read it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sweetening Judgment. I'll just pull some highlights from it. Assuming I have Wi-Fi in here, perfect. So this one changed my life. I don't know about you or any of you out there watching or listening, but judgment is something we all fall into, right? We judge our parents, we judge friends, colleagues, enemies, whomever it might be. So this is what the Kabbalists have to say. Every word we speak, every action we perform is a boomerang flung into the cosmos. All of these billions of boomerangs inevitably return to our lives, the positive ones and the negative ones. Though we're not aware of it, any negative behavior, even if it seems minor, brings destructive forces into play. Whenever we speak in an uncivil or rude manner, whenever we cheat, lie, steal, insult, or harm other people, pop, we create a force of judgment. These negative forces are the unseen cause behind everything that seemingly goes wrong in our lives. It may take minutes, months, or even years, but eventually we must confront the consequences of our reactive deeds. Right now, obstacles present in our lives are because of the force called judgment. And judgments befall us to the degree that we inflict judgment upon others. However, Kabbalah teaches that our own words cannot serve as an indictment against us. We cannot decree judgment upon our own being. Life, therefore, is cleverly arranged so that we constantly meet and befriend people who commit similar sins and errors to our own. And when we judge them, in that very moment, our fate is sealed. Though suppose, what if we could refrain from judging friends, family, and undeserving foes? If this were possible, then judgments against us would never come to pass. It's one of my favorite things I've ever read.
Jen, thank you so much, love.
Oh,
I appreciate
love you,
it.
my friend. This was so much fun. You and I can talk for hours.
I know, we can keep going, but I also know you got other interviews to do. So 2 things. 1, where can people find you? And 2, what could you use more than anything in the world? We've got an audience of a lot of female designers and a lot of technologists and different people. So let's know where we can find you and what are you calling in right now?
Beautiful. Thank you, my friend. So if people want to just find out about me in general, you can go to Metabizics. I love it because it means beyond business, Metabizics. So metabizics.com is my main website where you can find out about classes and different things I do. On my personal passion side is we're developing a technology company, which is, I never thought going from legal recruiting to developing a tech company, a software company has been an amazing journey filled with gifts. And so the thing that we're really looking for right now is partners who are great beta clients who want to be able to have free access to our algorithm. So as we mentioned, we developed this algorithm to match coaches with those they coach, mentors with those they mentor, therapists with those who they're treating. And we're very lucky. We have a few clients who have already signed on and we're offering 3 more beta clients testing. So if somebody out there, if you know a marketplace, a business that offers consultants to companies, like one of our first clients actually has services they provide to people in Australia who have been impacted by floods, fires, horrible situations, and they need coaches and therapists. And so our algorithm will then just automatically gets embedded in a website via API. And we're looking for other marketplaces and things and people to partner with. It's so important for me. It's not about doing business. It's about aligning with people spiritually who care as much as we do. Like I said earlier, I want every person on the planet to have the right mentors, have the people who need it. I'm grateful. Intuitively, I'm able to draw these in from spiritual practices. And if I could give every person the gift in the world of having the right coach, the right mentor, the right therapist, I wouldn't be here, Nick. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all the people who helped me when I was in my dark times.
Beautiful.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much, love. I appreciate you. Thank you again.
Love you, my friend. I'm so grateful we connected.
Yeah,
Thank you,
likewise,
universe.
likewise, love. Yeah.
Aw.
All right. Thank y'all. Have a good day. Peace.